All right.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm excited to introduce our 4 p.m. Eastern presenter, Victoria German, who's going to be talking today about increasing productive communication statements in esports players. Victoria, take it away.
Hi. As she mentioned, my name is Victoria Herman. My pronouns are she, her, and I will be presenting on increasing productive communication statements in esports players. So first, thank you all. I'm excited to be here and share with you my work as a behavior analyst and all the work we did in supporting our various collegiate esports teams. One of those areas in particular, and the focus of this study, was the work I did on working on focusing on communication in a collegiate junior varsity League of Legends team. For those unfamiliar with League of Legends, it's a 5v5 team-based objective game. It's very complex. There's a lot going on in this game, and there's a lot to attend to as an individual and as a team, and players are interdependent upon each other in this setting for collective situational awareness and time-sensitive and high-intensity decisions. So communication is very critical to success in this game. And it's so crucial to success that the makers of League of Legends, Riot, have even over the years introduced a reward system for being a positive teammate to your players and started adding prompts telling players that you'll win more games if you start to communicate better. And it turns out the previous research does support this statement. In League of Legends, there is a positive relationship between word frequency, content, and speech patterns, and the effects on team cohesion, overall team performance, member satisfaction, the likelihood of players staying on the same team, and winning matches. It's related to winning matches. So teams that communicate better are happier and win more. So, an overview of all this previous non-experimental research did set the foundation on the importance and the impacts of effective communication in League. Now that we know that it's related and it matters, what do how do we improve it? Is the next step. There is one study that we found that directly targeted communication for improvement, Meyer 2024, and they did so with Overwatch players. In this study, they used a pre-post-test group design, surveying players to evaluate on how they thought their team communicated after two different scrims. After the first scrim and survey, to improve communication, they provided an information session, so about like 15 to 30 minutes of kind of a training where they talked to players about types of in-game communication and encouraged them to use them more in-game. After the second scrim and survey, they found that players reported an increased perception of like communicating more and more often after that intervention. However, there's yet to be a behavior analytic intervention specifically targeting communication improvement in League of Legends. Our goal for this study was to build on that existing work and provide another practical tool that coaches could use with their teams in three ways. First, we wanted to expand on that research, and instead of using indirect survey measures, we wanted to use a direct measurement of survey or of, of player communication. So we looked at what they actually said during gameplay. This is most critical to this study. It gave us a really clear picture of what was happening in real time, let us capture specific measurable changes in communication, and as the intervention was introduced, and to complement that past research on player self-report. If you think about a survey, there are a lot of factors that could impact responses, and like your 3 out of 5 may be different from my 3 out of 5. Or responses could be sensitive to other factors, such as they won the game, and they felt that they had communicated more. So the first change was direct measurement. Second, we wanted to see how the intervention affected each individual player rather than as a group overall. So we decided on a single case design as the best fit for this study. This approach made it easier to spot consistent improvements and provide the kind of player level insights that coaches could actually use to guide training. Lastly, third, we used an information session, but we also added feedback and goal setting because in behavior analytic research, they're shown to be highly effective when used together. And we wanted to use something that we felt would work. So the purpose of this study was to evaluate the effects of an information session plus ongoing feedback and goal setting on player rates whether on increasing player rates of communication in a collegiate League of Legends team. This would allow us to select effective coaching mechanisms and to improve player communication in a more meaningful and efficient way. So I'll talk about how we accomplish this. First, players played from our esports facility, and all communications, meetings, feedback, etc., were conducted via Discord. So I did everything remotely, just like their coach was doing. We recruited 4 of the players from this 5-player team. They were identified as needing the most support, so we targeted them in particular. And for our design, as our single case design, we decided on a multiple baseline design. And for those unfamiliar, I'll show you later, but everyone starts in baseline and the intervention is introduced in a staggered fashion. The work we did took about 8 weeks in total. And so as far as how we collected the data on communication, we did it live in game for each game. And this was during their regularly scheduled practice. So sometimes they were playing a tournament, sometimes they were playing a scrim. If they were communicating, we were tracking it. We were taking data on it. And we decided on a rate for their communication to produce after each game. So it was the count of statements made divided by time. So much like their CS or their vision score after a game, players got a communication score. So why we did the communication score? Coaches were already paying attention to communication as well. They were often providing feedback and giving reminders to players like keep up the communication. However, that kind of makes it vague for league players on how to actually improve their communication. And indeed, when we looked at the data, it wasn't helping. And we know there's more to communication than just say keep it up. So we took our time in reviewing the behavior analytic literature and collaborating with the coaches as well on what specifically they were looking for in relation to communication from our players. And that involved various different components, different kinds of callouts and requests you can make to your teammates. And many of the ones that you see here, I know there's like 8 on the screen. I'll go over a couple just to provide examples on what we taught the players. And so we told them things like information sharing would be a valuable comm. So dragging up in 30 or declaring intent, expressing things like what you plan to do, like I'll gank mid after I get blue buff, or statements of acknowledgement like heard or got it. That way, just to keep that feedback up that we're listening to each other. Procedures. Now, what did we actually do? What did this all look like? So, baseline, first we're collecting data without intervening. This is to assess the player skill level and to see the impact of what is already going on in the environment, such as the coach giving those statements of feedback. So no, our intervention is not happening at this time. And now I'm going to orient you to this graph. This is one of our players, Lydia, and the y-axis is the rate of communication statements made per minute from 0 to 5, and the x-axis is each game played. And as you can see, after the 3rd game played, the intervention starts. This is the full multiple baseline design graph. It's the same, but there's a graph for each player. The x-axis is still each game played, but the intervention is introduced in a staggered way. There's a y-axis for each player, so you can see each player's rate going up. Here are our 4 players targeted and each of their data. And for a reference point, the varsity League of Legends team, remember these are all junior varsity players, the varsity team was communicating at a rate of 3.4 comms per minute. Ooh. And as you can see, Lydia was communicating at around 1 statement per minute. So was saying one thing every minute. Pierre less so. So every couple of minutes, you might hear something from Pierre. Kim's data was interesting. They were variable. They weren't necessarily at low rates, but because of that variability, we wanted to target more consistent communication. And as you can see, like the behavior kind of goes up and then it goes down. Like it's not it's just not maintaining. So we wanted to, and they even mute themselves in baseline a little bit. Like they're not, um, they're getting frustrated trying to communicate. And Senua also not necessarily at low rates, but it's going down. So we wanted to add feedback to that so that we wanted to add that intervention for them so that we can get that back up. So at that line, each of them start their intervention with an information session. I met with them individually. It really wasn't much. I just showed them this Word document handout over Discord, and I talked to them about what communication looks like and like what I wanted them to do, just to inform them of what kind of requests to make, what kind of call outs to make, making praise statements, etc. Then, after the information session, they started to get ongoing feedback and goal setting. Uh, to give you some more details on what that looks like, the uh, feed feedback is best done when as frequently as possible and in as many modalities as possible. So we did verbal and graphic or visual feedback, and so as frequently as possible after every game. And we wanted it individualized, and it should lean towards like the positive and constructive when necessary, but it should be mostly positive. And then goal setting. This one's kind of interesting. We really just wanted a comparison point to see where we could get the player improvement. We they didn't really need to meet the goal, and we wanted to give them just kind of a reference point. So I used the varsity team's average rate. There really isn't a lot of research in here on what an acceptable rate of communication is, so I used what I had. And I had already worked with the varsity team months ago, so I collected all of their data and just and gave and provided the average. And we kind of figured junior varsity to varsity would be a good comparison. So that's where we're at there. And then, so that's feedback and goal setting. But like, what does it look like to the players? Is this. It was just this screen that I shared with them. It wasn't much. It was quick. I uh, I populated their data after each game and spoke with them for 2 minutes, and and then we moved on. And so this was their comm score for a game, and I would say something like, here are your comms per minute, 1.6 compared to the varsity average of 3.4 comms per minute. And that's like that was their communication score. Their next session would look something like this. I would say your comms per minute were 2.5 compared to the varsity average of 3.4. And remember, your previous game was 1.6 comms per minute. That's a huge improvement. Nice job. So I made sure to recognize them for meeting, not just for meeting like or exceeding that average, but also for improvement from their previous game. That was really what we were focusing on here. For our results, did all of this work together? In summary, yes. As you can see, each player showed improvement and only showed improvement after receiving the intervention. Most even exceeded that varsity score. To look at it more closely, Lydia showed a remarkable, huge improvement, even exceeding that varsity score at some point, and was on an upward trend by the time they stopped intervention. Pierre improved, even if they didn't make it up to that like above average level. They were previously calming at like fewer than one statement per minute, and then started to communicate at a much higher rate. Was now consistently saying something every minute and making call outs, making requests, etc. Kim's data gets much less variable in intervention and much more stable too. So we see like that improvement there that we wanted. And Senua's data look really nice and pretty. It was originally going down and was all consistently below that average line. And then once we talked to them and started working with them, it just shot right up. It Great data. So here's a summary of all of those data together. This is the average rate of communication statements between baseline and intervention for each player. Red is baseline, green is intervention. And as you can see, everyone showed an improvement, and some even showed a doubling of their data. And to prove to you that these data are reliable and accurate, I have my reliability and integrity data here. Uh, we had an average of 84% reliability between data collectors, and we 100% followed protocol and did all the interventions that we were supposed to. Our discussion wrapping up here. First, this was effective at improving player communication for each individual. It, we, so my recommendation is provide clear, objective information wherever possible. It was valuable to us and to the players to provide the data. When it came to our feedback sessions and self-reports, I can anecdotally say that I would, during my 2-minute meetings, I would talk to the players about how they felt the game went before I showed them their data. And sometimes they would say they didn't feel like they did all that well. Like maybe they lost the game or something. Or it was stressful. But then when I showed them the graph, they would be surprised to see their data. It mattered that we provided them their data rather than make them guess about how they did. And then these procedures are useful and they are not necessarily specific to League. You could apply this to any game. And I'd love to see that in future directions. That would be super cool. Um, and then, but if you do want to improve communication in your team, provide feedback consistently, not just when it's low or as an occasional prompt or reminder, but but if you want to keep it at a high level, you have to keep paying attention to it and recognizing when players are doing well. And then also critical, be clear about what you mean. We had to define communication and really teach what we meant by it. Players weren't guessing how they did. They also are not guessing what we mean by communication. And then once you've defined it, you you can break it down more. For another future direction. Um, what kinds of communication are critical to improve on? What does this player need versus that player? Or it could be that certain types are more valuable in certain situations. It could be that information sharing is most valuable for the jungler in League of Legends, or strategy callouts are most important in fights, or maybe a specific player needs to increase requests for support. Then, lastly, before I wrap this up, something interesting we observed as their overall communication behavior increased. So we took data on subsets of these as well. Their statements of encouragement also increased. They started adding in these praise statements for their behavior. And remember that player, what Kim muted themselves in baseline a few times? They no longer did so in intervention. They also started encouraging their teammates more. So not only did we increase communication, we started to change their culture. Lastly, I need to say thank you to my team and everyone who helped make this presentation possible. I appreciate you all, and thank you all for your time and your attention. I'm really glad to be here, and please reach out to me for any questions. That's my email. If you need a copy of references, I'm happy to provide. And yeah, I really love talking about this, so please reach out to me. I would love that. And that's it.
Well, Victoria, it looks like everyone else loves talking about this too, because you have a ton of questions in the
Okay.
chat.
All right.
So just to make it a little easier, I'll read some of them over for you.
Thank you.
First question, person says that they're sorry if it was already addressed. They got here a little late, but
That's
they're
okay.
curious to know if there's a relationship between effective communication in game and in other settings. Where is communication a durable skill? It'd be great if you could show that improving communication in game is portable to external settings.
Oh, like, is it okay? Like, I guess for clarity, is that a question of like, does it transfer outside when I've taught
Yes.
them this in this setting? We didn't take data on that specifically. Um, I would hope so. I would love to see that. And I would love to see that as a future direction as well.
And the same person followed up, do players more highly skilled in communication maintain higher rates and quality of communication when they're losing?
Yeah, from the research, it can be context dependent. You're more likely to be consistent when you've practiced a skill enough, you're going to be more consistent with it. And even in high stress situations. And indeed that was happening here with these players. Like they weren't always winning either in intervention. Sometimes those were losses, but because we were continuously providing them with feedback and attention to their communication, it stayed at high rates regardless of the circumstances.
Another person has asked, how do you classify useful communication? And I think some of the subtext of this question is also, how do you
Yeah.
convey that to players? Because he says, I had an intervention with a college team and one person was chatting all the time. When he was told not to speak, the team got better.
Okay. um, Game related was so we took data specifically on game related comms. If they were talking about what they ate for lunch, we didn't count it. We counted that against them, or we didn't subtract it from the score. We took data on it separately, but as a like an off-topic comm. And indeed, like there are some behavior analytic interventions for how you decrease behavior, such as a statement of discouragement, like stop communicating about that in particular. But as far as so we defined effective communication as game related and not not and not an insult towards your teammate. Not that that happened, but because these were selected players, but it was basically anything game related was effective.
Mhm. Another question was about social effects. What effect does a high communicator have on the rest of the team? Or how does the presence of one high communicator change the behavior of the rest of the team?
I didn't take data on that specifically, but you bringing up an interesting point that we thought about a few times, like how is that going to is this behavior going to spread? Is it going to teach others to communicate more? And yeah, this is all like really early data, and I would like love to do more work on this. Yeah,
Well, that works because the last question you've got is a little bit of a perspective one. The person says tournament stress can affect both players and coaches.
yeah.
What research could be done to examine how coaches' communication patterns change under pressure and how ABA strategies might help maintain effective behaviors during high stakes matches?
Um, uh, well, let's see. Well, for starters, we did take data on they were playing tournaments during some of these. So we were able to still effectively improve their communication. However, there could also be some descriptive research on, as your question seems to indicate, on what is happening and what are the impacts of these high stress situations, and then how to specifically target it in those settings. But like as my data did generalize to those settings in particular, they were in high stress situations, and the players were still able to keep up very high rates of communication to stability. So yeah, these methods were able to work across different kinds of stressors.
Excellent. That's all the questions I see for you in the chat. You've got another minute or so left. Is there any
Okay.
final point you want to leave the audience with? Because they obviously had a lot to say about this research.
Oh my gosh. It's no, just like keep up the communication, y'all. I really appreciate y'all being here, and please, that's my email. Please reach out to me if you have any more questions.
Sounds good. All right, on that, we will transition to our break, and our next presenter will be on at 4:30 Eastern.
Thank you so much, Victoria.